Kayak kami mencoba untuk melakukan mengadakan seri diskusi dan dengan platform online untuk menelusuri kembali atau mengkaji kembali tentang bagaimana sebenarnya yang bisa kita lakukan dalam kajian-kajian kewilayahan ini. Topik-topik seperti apa, metode-metode seperti apa, dan kemudian pendekatan seperti apa yang memang bisa kita aplikasikan atau kita ikuti untuk memahami letak Indonesia dalam konteks konstelasi geopolitik internasional. Nah, itu area scape ini, yang pertama ini adalah seri pertama, dan kebetulan kita mendapat kehormatan bisa berdiskusi atau berdialog dengan Dr. Goh Beng Lan. Ibu Beng Lan ini sekarang ada di Penang di Malaysia. Sebelumnya beliau adalah dosen di National University of Singapore dan US, tetapi mulai sejak tahun ini beliau diminta untuk jadi profesor tamu di Fakultas Ilmu Pengetahuan Budaya di UI. Nah, Ibu Beng Lan ini salah satu peneliti atau sarjana scholar yang sangat konsisten untuk melakukan kajian-kajian yang terkait dengan area studies. Dan salah satu bukunya yang sudah terbit ini adalah ini, Decentering and Diversifying Southeast Asian Studies, terbitan 2011. Dan sejak buku ini terbit, beliau juga sudah banyak menulis beberapa karangan-karangan lain yang terkait dengan area studies. Dan karangan yang terbaru akan muncul tahun ini, 2020, di jurnal Japanese Southeast Asian Studies, kalau nggak salah ya. Nah, jadi ini salah satu kesempatan yang menurut saya sangat penting, karena kita bisa berdiskusi, berdialog langsung dengan Ibu Beng Lan tentang apakah memang area studies itu penting, dan kalaupun penting seperti apa, dan apakah konsekuensinya bagi kita untuk melakukan penelitian area studies. Metode seperti apa, konsep seperti apa, pendekatan seperti apa yang bisa kita pakai untuk memahami perkembangan area studies dan untuk memahami situasi atau kondisi sosial politik, budaya, agama, dan lain sebagainya di negara lain. Nah, area Skype ini kita formatnya bentuknya adalah percakapan. Jadi artinya Ibu Beng Lan tidak akan melakukan presentasi, tetapi akan berdialog dengan saya sebagai tuan rumahnya. Dalam beberapa macam, kita akan mencoba untuk menelusuri banyak isu, banyak topik, banyak persoalan yang ada dalam kajian wilayah, khususnya untuk Asia Tenggara. Nah, kita akan bercakap-cakap, berdialog selama kurang lebih 30-45 menit, dan kemudian nanti setelah itu kita akan buka floor, kita akan buka kesempatan untuk teman-teman untuk ikut berkomentar, urun rembuk, dan tanya, diskusi atau apapun baik dengan Ibu Beng Lan maupun dengan saya. Nah, selama kita bercakap-cakap atau berdialog, nanti kalau ada teman-teman yang ingin bertanya, silakan dimanfaatkan kolom chat. Tolong cantumkan nama di sana, nanti saya akan catat. Nah, nanti pada saat open discussion, nanti kita akan berikan kesempatan untuk teman-teman untuk bertanya. Kalau ingin bertanya secara langsung, nanti pada saat itu nanti mikrofon akan oleh moderator, mikrofon akan dibuka. Tapi seandainya ingin bertanya melalui kolom chat juga boleh. Jadi terserah, silakan saja mana yang lebih nyaman buat teman-teman semua. Jadi saya rasa pengantar saya cukup begitu, dan sekali lagi terima kasih Ibu Beng Lan sudah bersedia hadir. Untuk forum, untuk percakapan saya akan melontarkan pertanyaan dengan bahasa Indonesia. Kalau terserah Ibu Beng Lan nanti akan menjawab dengan bahasa Indonesia atau Inggris atau Malay juga boleh. Jadi kita apa namanya, karena saya lihat juga ada beberapa teman dari Jepang yang ikut bergabung, dan mungkin saya nggak tahu apakah beliau-beliau itu ada yang ahli Indonesia semua atau tidak semua yang ahli Indonesia, tapi barangkali kita mungkin bisa menggunakan dua bahasa lah yang kita lakukan. Dan saya rasa itu saja dulu pertama. Jadi untuk pertama kita akan mulai dengan mencoba untuk melihat kembali tentang bagaimana perkembangan kajian wilayah. So kita akan mencoba menelusuri, karena kajian wilayah ini mungkin dari beberapa teman-teman yang memang aktif di studi itu sesuatu hal yang bukan baru lagi. Tetapi kalau buat teman-teman yang barangkali masih bingung, mungkin ada baiknya kita memahami sedikit tentang konteks ya. Jadi kalau bicara kajian wilayah, bagaimana konteksnya, di mana dia berkembangnya, terus kemudian apa yang menjadikan kajian wilayah itu penting, dan bagaimana kajian wilayah itu kemudian seperti yang dipahami Southeast Asian Studies itu sampai ke Indonesia. Nah, kita akan coba mulai seperti itu dulu. Nah, barangkali secara singkat, karena mungkin Ibu Beng Lan cukup mengikuti perkembangan ini sejak dari kajian wilayah yang berkembang di Amerika Serikat tahun 50 ya, dengan dibukanya program-program kajian wilayah di Ivy League, di Cornell, di Harvard, dan kemudian berkembangnya Southeast Asian Studies, terutama di Cornell dan di beberapa universitas yang terkemuka di Amerika Serikat. Barangkali bisa dijelaskan secara singkat sebenarnya kenapa kajian wilayah ini muncul, dan apa yang membedakan yang disebut dengan area studies di Amerika Serikat dengan perkembangan yang sebenarnya sudah jauh ada sebelumnya, yaitu orientalisme di Eropa. Barangkali bisa dijelaskan sedikit, Bu. Silakan.
Terima kasih Fadjar. So also terima kasih kepada rakan-rakan semua untuk kerana partisipasi ya konferensi ini. Ini zaman COVID-19, everybody goes virtual ya. So mungkin saya berbahasa Inggris kerana lebih
silakan.
And okay, so when we talk about area studies, I think here we talk, there are many origins, of course, but of course, one of the most influential practice, I think, is the one that emanated from the US, which is actually formed during the Cold War. Of course, prior to that, there was a kind of Asian non-Western studies, Oriental studies, as we would call it in Western Europe. That would be, way back, if you see when they were starting to talk about the non-West, if you can trace it from Greek philosophy to later on Oriental studies, that was largely Western Europe. I suppose the framework of area studies, I think, the US version. And we have to remember its origins is tied to the Cold War. And that is also a reason why the crisis of area studies, because it was, of course, then tied to the collapse of the Cold War. Right? So if you were to look at that history, the origins of the area studies in the US, how they map into regions, what has got to do with early ideas of Orientalist ideas, yeah. And so, if you look at that, I think the importance for me here is to narrate its history to understand the crisis, and therefore the question of why area studies is there's a question about it and why we are all interested in it, and we continue to do it, and how is it related to wider humanities and social sciences. If you look at the origins, of course, it's tied to Cold War. Southeast Asia is a region where, you know, Cold War is also, it's Cold War to the US or to Europe, but to us it's not really cold, it's quite a hot war because people die. We see the Vietnam War, we see other kinds of genocides and other kinds of armed struggles, right? But what I want to focus on is when this crisis of area studies started, and it's linked to knowledge production. If area studies was an origins of Cold War, it was for knowledge production to understand the region in the ideological fight against, you know, between the so-called the free world, you know, the capitalist world, and the kind of socialist or communist world. As you see that, you know, the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1991, even prior to that, there were, of course, already antecedents. And along with always geopolitical or reality, human sciences or knowledge production has always run in parallel, and changes in questions of theory, critical questions on knowledge production always, you know, correlate with what's happening in the world. And so if you find that in the humanities and social sciences, we have experience, we all know about the post-structural turn, right? And eventually the post-colonial turn. All that is in the shadow of the Cold War, the end of the Cold War, where all old foundations were being, you know, rethought and all. So I think the critique of area studies is part of a critique of the humanities and the social sciences. If you look at in the American genre of area studies, traditionally or typically, one can say, of course, there are also different variants of it. One cannot say there's just one variant, but typically area studies is formed as a collaborative where different disciplines come together. Therefore, they are research centers rather than departments, and therefore it's really more what one would call multidisciplinary. So the question is, people from different disciplines come together, study particular regions, but whether they talk or not, the idea is, of course, to blend, to bring the social sciences to complement and to enforce and to strengthen the humanities, because the study of the region traditionally started with the study of language, of philosophy, you know, so it's largely quite in the West, the origins is largely strongly humanities. And when area studies was formed, is to bring in the social sciences and to give it so-called structure, to give it, the discourse of love versus structure, you know, that's it. So area studies is formed to bring in social sciences to complement the humanities. That's the kind of US origins. But whether that really worked or not, whether there's a true marriage, you know, so the question of, is it just multidisciplinary? Is it interdisciplinary? Do people come together? Do they really talk to each other, or they just study the region and they do their own different work without talking to other? These are the perpetual questions that became part and parcel of the crisis of area studies. So with the Cold War, with the end of the Cold War, and also along with the turn, eventually the post-colonial turn, the post-structural run is really a questioning of the foundations of Western knowledge within the West itself. And with that space open up, post-colonial turn came in because if the West is now questioning its own foundations of knowledge, therefore, what about knowledge about the non-West, which was produced by the West? So that's when the so-called post-colonial turn came about. Early started by the subaltern scholars, eventually it became called as post-colonial studies, right? Now with this these turns, right, it also affected the practices of humanities and social sciences. A lot of foundations were being criticized. Of course, Orientalism is the kind of the theoretical foundation that kicked off this crisis, right? Really the basis of knowledge production. And here, you know, is about the knowledge production of the non-West by the West, right? So you find that, and when this happened, of course, you find that classical disciplines like anthropology, right, and of course area studies in history, and every discipline I think was really affected. But in particular area studies, because it's of its origins tied closely to the Cold War, information or knowledge gathering for Cold War purposes, right, and of course its Orientalist origins earlier to that. So area studies came under particular critique in the US. And this is in time, at the same time where the rise of so-called newer, more progressive disciplines that can escape some of the Orientalist foundations were being formed, like we find cultural studies is one of them, post-colonial studies, right? And various other kind of interdisciplinary studies that were formed at that time, right? And so area studies in the US, in the eyes of, or in the history of the US development, is seen as a very old-fashioned, they call it old dinosaur, right? Because it was produced for Cold War knowledge, you know. So therefore it came under critique. And I think the critique, I mean, the critiques are valid because, you know, there are problems, right? With the kind of framework of area studies, definitely, right? In the US. But we must remember there are also other origins of area studies out there. If you see, you know, in Japan, Chinese studies, right? China, right? And all that, that was also already part of regional studies, right? Which is also in Japan a critique of the Japanese kind of Western way of progress, and it's a relationship with China, is a difficult relationship with China. And in China, you have the Nanyang studies, which started even at the same time as area studies started in Cornell, for instance, Southeast Asian studies. So there are different models of different origins, you must not forget that. But despite it, I think the US model has become extremely influential and universalized. Most of us, even in South Asia, we are influenced in many ways, right? That's because of the flow of knowledge and the way we also go to different centers of knowledge in the West to do our PhD and so on, right? So, so we must remember that in mind, that the crisis of area studies tied to geopolitics, the end of the Cold War, is part of a crisis of the humanities and social sciences. We must not forget that, because I think there's a tendency to kind of criticize area studies and as if, you know, it is of a different species. But I think it is part and parcel of a wider crisis of knowledge production in response to the changing world. And at that time, in the 1980s, 1990s, was really the end of the Cold War, the change of geopolitical configuration. And if you look at the geopolitical configurations of the Cold War, of the end of the Cold War, when I went to Europe, I understood why to the Europeans or to the Westerners, they saw the end of the Cold War as a shift of a center. Because it's true, Western Europe changed. Central Europe, you know, Eastern Europe, and then you have Russia, you know, when there's no more borders, typically the center changed, right? And of course to the US, if there's no longer this Cold War, you know, so maybe the change of geopolitical changes is very strongly felt in the West, the so-called end of the Cold War. But maybe for us in Southeast Asia, it's not so changed. We're still minority, we're still a sub-region out there in the periphery. You know, the West is still very much a center to us, right? So of course there are changes, but this is just something I want to say. Like, okay, so if you have the crisis of area studies in the US, many of the critiques I think are valid and are useful and are certainly true about some of the problems of area studies. But the call for transformation of area studies is not even, actually in the US, is called for abandoning, for discarding area studies because totally useless, totally dinosaur, totally conservative, and that one should move on to either post-colonial studies, submodern studies, or cultural studies, or what have you, international studies, and so on. Now, I think these are fine, you know, but for us, when a critique, a progressive critique, anything that is progressive in intent does not mean that when it stays constant. When you move out of the West, what is progressive can also become regressive. I think this is something that we all know, and it's also a problem. So if you have an answer of a progressive answer, and you move it outside the West, it can be a problem because abandonment, the so-called critique of area studies, right? That is useless, it's really Cold War in origins. When it applies to Southeast Asia, to many of us who are my generation and younger, we are just beginning to discover. First, area studies is a way for us to understand the region. Second, at the time of the 80s and 90s, when it's flourishing in the region, it is a vehicle for us to vote, to articulate our voices about our understanding of the region, right? And I think thirdly, that the area studies came later in Southeast Asia And it was formed, in, I think, 70s, 80s, and 90s was really flourishing in the 90s. Yeah, of course, like University Malaya was one of the earliest in the 60s, right? And so on. I've written about part of it in my book. But you find that the practice, what drove me to work on this was that I found it disconcerting when so much critique and the area studies is useless. But to us, it is still an important vehicle. And just when we are speaking, why should we abandon it? Right? So this is the discrepancy. And I think this is where the politics, progressive politics, when they move out of somewhere and it applies elsewhere, it can change, and it may not necessarily be progressive. So my response to it is that, okay, let's look at the crisis, the critique of area studies, and then let us unpack it and see what happens. Is it applicable? What are the dimensions that are applicable to us? And what are our practices that are different? So I think maybe that's the first question.
Yeah, thank you, for the long explanation. Dan saya rasa ini memberikan sebuah framework, konteks buat kita semua untuk memahami sebenarnya apa yang disebut dengan area studies itu bukan sesuatu yang monolitik. Ya. Dia datang ke sebuah wilayah seperti Asia Tenggara dengan sebuah konteks sejarah yang memang spesifik. Dalam hal ini khususnya dalam kajian Asia Tenggara itu peran di kepentingan perang dingin itu menjadi sesuatu yang sangat dominan. Tapi ada satu pertanyaan yang saya ingin eksplorasi lagi untuk hal ini, Beng Lan. Kalau disebut tadi bahwa saat ini di Barat sendiri itu sudah mengalami krisis ya, area studies, kritik terhadap area studies. Nah, di satu sisi bahwa kita di Asia Tenggara ini boleh dibilang pemain baru ya dalam kajian wilayah. Berbeda dengan teman-teman barangkali yang di Cina maupun di Jepang yang sudah lama juga punya program untuk so-called area studies meskipun namanya beda-beda. Ada Nanyang Studies, mungkin di Jepang juga namanya juga beda juga gitu. Nah, persoalannya adalah kalau saya lihat dalam konteks perkembangan diskursus pengetahuan tentang area studies di Asia Tenggara maupun di kawasan Asia yang lain itu krisis hampir tidak pernah dirasakan, atau artikulasi terhadap krisis itu mungkin berbeda. Nah, jelas kalau di Amerika atau di Eropa misalnya dengan adanya post-colonial studies dan adanya kemudian subaltern studies itu memberikan satu serangan yang langsung ataupun tusukan yang langsung terhadap konstruksi pengetahuan modernitas. Tapi kesan saya di Asia Tenggara maupun di Asia Timur pada ini krisis itu tidak terlalu dirasakan. Apakah itu memang seperti itu atau memang benar-benar yang kita lakukan itu betul-betul yang kita lihat krisis itu adalah krisis mereka, bukan krisis kami gitu dalam pengertian produksi pengetahuan. Bagaimana menurut Ibu Beng Lan?
Saya rasa itu adalah juga. And kalau if we are scholars or researchers, we have to read, we have to know what's going on because we are not isolated. Even our origins, as I say, area studies, even though we have different development, it did come from it's very much influenced by, I think, Western practices. Although some people may argue otherwise and say that, no, it's not, we have our own origins. Of course, they are fine to have their own ideas, but I do think that in the real world, we are very interconnected. And that's why, whether it is, either you can happily and ignore the rest of the world and continue to do your area studies and study the region, study your own country, or study the region. You can do that. But I think as scholars and in the real world today, we cannot ignore the realities of interconnection. And this comes to, I will come back to it because it's the center of the problem of knowledge production and center of the problem of this kind of, the critique of knowledge production. We have to engage with ideas because we are an interconnected world. We have to bring back commonness and a kind of a sense of universality in a different way, right? So now coming back to the crisis of area studies, I think we do experience it. First, even if we don't link to Western discourses, I think every country has their own particular specificities of the study of whether it's national studies, whether it is of area studies, Southeast Asian studies, whether it's community studies, of Budaya or whatever, right? Even with our national development, I mean, of course, area studies is very tied to local region, national boundaries, or communities on a wider, whether it's Malay studies and so on, which can become wider, but it's nevertheless, the national boundaries are very important. Even as we look at Southeast Asia, the nation building project itself has gone through so many, different phases. If in the 50s and 60s was a time of a nation pride was so important, we all want to build a new nation. It was a sense of pride, an opportunity to build a new, to be free, to overcome colonialism, right? But we know that very well by the 70s, by the 80s, we have problem with a very strong, powerful state, right? And then, of course, we have this, we are also part of globalization, part of capitalism, after the end of the Cold War, we went into global capitalism. And the crisis today is a different one. The crisis today is very much the crisis of capitalism. They call it neoliberal capitalism, what have you. But it's a crisis of growth, excessive growth of a kind of capitalism that is relentless, and a kind of the materialism we have, and of course, environmental crisis. The balance and ecological, and we see COVID-19 is part of it. It's about human expansion in nature. It's about and so this crisis today, whether it's at the political front, whether it's the natural front, right? It is a new crisis today. It's a crisis of what is the alternative? What is the future? So I think whether we like it or not, we can practice our area studies our own way. We cannot ignore what's going on. We are partakers of the world, of the global process. We are as globalized as other nations today. And on top of it, I think many of us, maybe now the younger generation, they can be fully, because of many more, but people, our seniors, most of them have to do their PhD overseas. Our generation, some of us do our studies partially locally and then partially overseas. And I think now the younger ones, they have the opportunity to do it fully local, but they also, of course, would like to go elsewhere to do their studies. I think it's fine, being open to knowledge, because it's important. So I think we are connected. Whether we like it or not, we are connected. And the fact we are here in COVID-19 shows we cannot escape what's going on in the world. So we are.
But saya ingin kembali kepada soal krisis tadi. Itu mengingatkan saya, reminds me yang ditulis oleh Prasenjit Duara. Dan ini juga dikutip dalam tulisannya Beng Lan yang terakhir, bahwa salah satu persoalan yang kita hadapi sekarang ini memang berkaitan dengan subjektivitas atau cara melihat masa depan, future. Dan inilah yang kemudian disebut sebagai krisis tadi oleh Ibu Beng Lan, the crisis of the future. Bagaimana misalnya dengan situasi pandemik sekarang ini, masa depan kita seperti apa, dengan kapitalisme yang semakin masuk ke dalam wilayah-wilayah yang private misalnya, itu seperti apa nanti masa depan. Tetapi kalau kita tarik ke belakang dengan krisis yang juga dialami pada 70-an, 80-an gitu. Apakah ada faktor-faktor yang barangkali bisa dibilang sama atau berbeda? Karena kalau kita melihat sebagai seorang pengkaji wilayah misalnya atau ahli area studies, kita harus bisa memahami konteksnya. Artinya bahwa konteks yang kita punya kalau kita bicara tentang crisis of area studies itu barangkali sangat historically historically situated gitu ya. Dan juga kalau bicara prognosis ke depan, tentu juga sifatnya akan berbeda dengan yang orientalisme maupun yang area studies yang muncul pada konteks perang dingin. Bagaimana, Ibu?
Oh yeah, I think memang ada koneksi ya. If you find in the Cold War, or the humans, the practice of humanities and social science, I call human sciences, okay? You find that there is, I think at the core of it is also a struggle about what is alternative, what is a better alternative for human beings. It always has been that. The Cold War was an ideological warfare between so-called free world and the socialist capitalist world. It is theoretical, it's ideological, and we as human scientists, we are also part of, there are people taking, I think the humanities, social science are deeply, deeply ideological. Either one is, so-called conservative scholar, one is also a leftist scholar, right? Even the so-called, or the post-structural turn and the post-colonial turn, deep at heart, they are shifts of the left. Critical scholarship. Critical scholarship would be scholarship that are, we understand as progressive. When it's progressive and critical, it's largely tied to a kind of radical or a leftist viewpoint. And in the Cold War, it was the leftist, the right way was the socialist way, right? The one is either a Marxist or a post-Marxist or what have you, a revised Marxist, as well, now we have, right? Or you are a more liberal scholar, right? So I think that foundation still is there. And even you look at post-colonial, post-structural and post-colonial scholars, it's deeply, they are, except that they are, I think, still very much critical. They are still against kind of capitalism, kind of authoritarian state. But for post-colonial scholars, I think the issue then, they say, it's not just structure, not just about politics or capitalism alone, but the culture, race, racial difference, gender difference, all matters, right? That they are important as well. So they bring in. So I think at the end of the day, I would say progressive scholarship, well, no matter how we quarrel, right? The intent of progressive scholarship is still, there's a divide. Either one is either just liberal and pro-capitalist, or one is actually more critical and trying to think that there are alternatives. Not to reject capitalism per se, maybe, because it's a reality we can't reject. But what are the ways forward? In the Cold War, was either so-called capitalist or non-capitalist socialist. But you find that they couldn't survive in the state. We have perestroika, you have, I forgot what's it called in Vietnam. What's it called? I forgot already. The opening up, you have China, the market economy, and so on and so forth, right? So I think that at the end of the day, it is about finding an alternative. Before, it was just about a capitalist future or a socialist future, a more egalitarian one. And then that kind of didn't work. And now we have to go forward. And what is the future? So the crisis for now seems to be liberalism or capital, neoliberal capital seems to be the champion. We can't resist it. How do we resist it? So the discourse is always about that. Either one that insists that there is, the issue of culture is important. So with the loss of the Cold War, you also find that the rise of the Cultural War, which is what drove to the terror, war of terror. It's part and parcel of the Cultural War. And then today, it's really, I think the Cultural War has not left, it's still there. But today, added on to it is a layer of climate war, of the environmental war. So Prasenjit Dwara's work is really about environmental crisis and also the materialism of capitalism.
Yeah.
I think this is the new, so it's still a crisis about a future. But at core, maybe the narrative today is no longer socialist versus capitalist, but what kind of future? I think even in the sciences, they have the same question. In the natural sciences, they have the same question.
Ya. Jadi ini yang menarik soal alternatif sebenarnya. Dan salah satu tawaran yang dikemukakan oleh Goh Beng Lan dalam artikel yang terakhir adalah barangkali kita bisa melihat atau memanfaatkan sebuah gerakan yang sekarang disebut Inter-Asia Studies. Inter-Asia. Dan Inter-Asia ini barangkali bisa dijelaskan sedikit tentang apakah itu Inter-Asia dan kemudian bagaimana posisi dia sebagai sebuah alternatif dalam dalam konstruksi pengetahuan yang terkait dengan kajian wilayah atau area study.
All right, so we go to this contemporary what is facing us, right? So inter-Asia studies, that's why we had the topic Asia rather than Southeast Asia. So why do we have to engage with Asia? Of course, we also, kind of feel, oh, Asia can be drowned by Southeast. Asia can drown us too. I mean, we have that struggle in a way too in Singapore, like, wow, Asian studies more important than Southeast Asian studies. Huh? Now, all these politics will go on, but I think core to it, what are the core questions, right? Now, the debates, I think here the inter-Asian studies, I think with the kind of crisis area studies, they open up, many more, and with the foundations of knowledge being challenged, you have different explorations of knowledge. And area studies too has experienced all kinds of transformations. There are all kinds of local kind of practices. I think what I work with the UI, they have an interesting model that's in the making. They have not just people who are studying Southeast Asia, they have people who study all kinds of regions in the world, but they are put in the area studies department in Southeast Asian studies, but they are Russian studies, they are Middle Eastern studies, and so on. And so they have an interesting model, which I think is in the making. It can be promising. So there are all kinds, and I'm sure there are all kinds of other models of emerging in Japan. They have one in Kyoto, we know. So I think that locally, but in this changing, in this finding answers, which is not only happening in area studies as it revises itself, or it's also happening in the humanities and social sciences and other disciplines. There's a flurry of trying to find new methods, new theory, new everything, right? To answer the crisis that we're facing now. Crisis of environmentalism, crisis of capitalism, right? We have STS, the Latour's theory, the Acton, and the, what's the word they call it? It's the ecology of, what's the word they call it? I forgot. They call it, as an Acton, and it is, I forgot the word anyway. Never mind.
Network theory.
Yes, network theory. Yeah, network theory, right? And so what we have is inter-Asia studies happens to be, I believe, because as even like Southeast Asian studies has been revising itself, and also within it, Asian studies in Asia. So people were studying larger East Asia, because East Asia still, as we know, the politics of, or the chronology, the politics of knowledge production still plague us today. If you look at Asia or non-West, what are the big continents that shape us? Is East Asia, South Asia, and then we are Southeast Asia. We are always minority. We are tribal. We are civilizational. Those kind of debates. So you find that there's been a lot of happenings, and I find that inter-Asia studies, not that is, of course, in every development there are good things, there are useful things, and there also sometimes can be problematic. But in it, I find that inter-Asia studies have thrown up quite interesting methods and arguments about, and providing us new frontiers of alternative knowledge beyond what we have, beyond so-called Western human sciences, right? But I have to say, we must remember that inter-Asia studies did not come out by itself. What they are doing today, arguments of circulatory knowledge, of dialogical knowledge, of post-humanist, vital materialists, these are full. What they're arguing about dialogical transcendence, about non-dichotomous knowledge are not only happening in Asian studies. It is also happening in many of the humanities and social sciences, in critical scholarship, right? So must not forget that, for instance, Buckmore has tried to recover universal history. That Hegelian thought, in her work on Haiti, was Hegel, who is a very important philosopher, defining philosopher of the 19th century, that his work would not come out only from the West. It was influenced by the slavery, the history of slavery, and the politics of slavery in Haiti itself. It's connected to the French Revolution, right? So it changes, it forces us to rethink history. The history didn't come out only. Hegelian idea is not only from the West. He is influenced by something that was happening outside the West, right? So you also have, of course, STS, the Acton and the network theory, which human beings are not the only subject to study, but organisms. So now we can study COVID-19 too, it's one virus, right? You can study mushrooms and so on and so forth, right? So, right, and then you also have, of course, philosophy, continental philosophy. People like Alain Badiou, Jacques Rancière, these are all theories that are also trying to rethink, not politics. It's not just about the human as the main subject, that politics can actually be about something else, an event in Badiou's work, and it's about the exploration, about finding out how the one is not one, the singular is not one. He uses a mathematics, right, to understand that this one out of what set theory, right? One, what is single, is not one that came out of a relation. So in other words, they're all talking about trying to find, in this case, the unknown within, what is unknown, yeah, the inconsistency of being. It's quite interesting, I find, right? And they also pose new methods, no longer dialectical transcendental knowledge, you know, but they are talking about about not finding false or true, but it's about subtraction, pulling off the layers of our understanding, and to understand that we are not one. And when we see this gap of us, our being, then we can start questioning. You know, actually, it's a bit like Buddhist philosophy. You know, it's unpeeling the layers, and what is out there in the real world is not real. To the Buddhists, what is out there is false. And when you have meditation, you can achieve enlightenment or some kind of what's the word? You can have your now I'm losing all my words, I'm getting old, you know, what's the word, instinct, or, you know, and that these are actually also forms of knowledge. So I'm trying to say is that, don't forget that what's happening in inter-Asia studies is in line with or falls parallel with what's also happening in the outside, the wider humanities and social sciences. And I think this is where area studies people must remember. Just because we're area studies, don't just read area studies. You know, we also must know what's going on out there in Western theory, Western development as well. If you want to move away and critique and post new knowledge, we have to understand what's out there before we can criticize it, before we can change it. So what I find interesting in inter-Asian studies, particularly in the work of Chen Guangxing and Dipesh and Prasenjit Dwara, is that they have it's actually returning to the old question of Asia, you know? And we are Southeast Asian studies. What are the core of it? We are saying we are different, right? And we are different from the West, right? Which I think is true. There is incommensurable knowledge. But I do not agree that this difference is so different we cannot speak with them, or that we have to bracket out the West and that let's just look what Chen Guangxing talks about. He's trying to say that both Chen Guangxing and Dwara are talking about there are Asian forms of knowledge and desires. It's not just knowledge and logic, right? It's not just about alternative logic, which is non-Cartesian, non-dichotomous, right? Non-linear. But there's also other forms of embodied desires that are different from Western ones. I think that's true, and I believe with that, right? But I think the way, and they have posed us with interesting procedures and interesting categories to talk about that, methods even of understanding knowledge, that knowledge can come from meditation, from bodily senses, from disciplining yourself, that there are other ways of understanding multiplicity, transcendence, dialogical transcendence. How do you live with diversity and then be able to achieve a kind of universality that still embraces the difference and yet is one. Now, in the kind of modern rational logic, which we are all kind of subscribed to, whether we are Indonesian, Malaysian, or live in the most, I don't know, I think most of us scholars, whether we like it, and even modern people today, the line of logic, even though we may say we are championing indigenous scholarship, I think that we are in many ways circumscribed by the kind of modern language and modern logics that we have, right? Because we tend to say what's secular, what's religious, what's rational, what's irrational, what's superstitious, what's, So this kind of dichotomous knowledge, I think, and not I think, but people are trying to undo. Even anthropologists, ontological anthropologists are doing that. And I think what Prasanjit and Chen have given us are some tools and some historical analysis, procedures, and even methods to think. For Chen is about, oh, let's just forget about the West and let's just look at circulation of knowledge in Asia and then compare, inter-reference. And then from there, maybe we can understand that there are different categories, different unfoldings, you know, different senses to a category, right? I think it's fine, right? And Prasanjit talks about recovering, actually uses exile age theory. Exile age is about this from, I forgot which century now, 6th century or something, you know, the rise of religious world, where spirituality was seen as an answer to the world, the crisis of the world at that time. So rise of Mesopotamia, India, and so forth, right? And this was tied to the great traditions, the great religious traditions. So he's reviving that kind of debate to see that within the great Eastern traditions, right, there are different kinds of logic, which is not about you and I, but it is about how can we live with diversity? You know, how can we be not so materialistic? How can we live with ecological balance? You know, how can, you know, and I think in many Asian thought we have that in all our practices. The human beings and our ancestors and spirits and all that live together. But we tend to see this as superstitious, as religious, and therefore we think they're not knowledge, right? But actually, maybe it's time for us to rethink that. They give us those, and that there are other forms of bodily knowledge. Just abstract knowledge enough alone is not enough, or is not only one, that we can also know by doing other things, by empathizing with people, by meditating, by disciplining our bodies, you know, and so on and so forth, right? So we're tapping into kind of so-called irrational religious world, no? And maybe this is still the crux, right? How do you discover? And I'm not saying that in the West they're not having that. They have also been. They have been the Theosophists, one example, who are trying to, you know, of course we look at them with they're a bit funny, but they are trying to step into Eastern Oriental or religions, right? So I think we are the core of this. If we are trying to say that there, and this is what Chen Guangxing and Dwara's book is, that there are different logic, there are alternative logics that are totally different, and that there are other embodied desires that are totally different from capitalist or Western ones that can help to save the world. They are saying that, right? So I think that, so in a way, they're not parochial. They're trying to use Asian forms of knowledge to answer to a wider global project, along with other critical scholars, right? They are all trying to rethink, you know, what's the alternative forward. So they're contributing to the debate. So we can learn from them, right? However, I find that there are some problems. You know, first is some people tend to, you know, in the inter-Asia studies, there's also a debate, oh, all other area studies are useless. You know, some people who are doing that can say Southeast Asian studies, just junk them, right? Or abandon them because it's useless. And let's just go inter-Asia. Now, I think any kind of hegemony is counterproductive. I think if you are progressive and you think that you have come up with different way of inter-Asia referencing, why do you need to silence people? And why do you need to say someone is bad or backward? I think, you know, I think that's defeating. So I think we can coexist, and we need to find ways to articulate and to learn from each other. So I think we can learn from this, what inter-Asia studies is doing, because they are recovering an old question that Asia is different, kind of an Asianism, but in a progressive way. And that they also pose us with methods and new categories of knowledge that are different from Cartesian knowledge, right? That there is such a thing as dialogical transcendence. You know, transcendence is a birth, and transcendence is about, you know, for us is overcoming the bipolar opposites to come up with something that's different. But dialogical transcendence, something that can embrace diversity within it. So it's kind of an equilibrium. There's not a homeostasis. It's not by itself a stagnant, but it is embracing a complex dynamic together. Now, in the Western logic of the golden mean or of homeostasis or equilibrium is quite different, you know. So those kind of intuition is bad in the Western modern knowledge, right? But actually, if we go back to Greek knowledge, intuition is about understanding the truth of nature, which is, if you look at it, spiritual knowledge is about intuition. Buddhism, or this is about, right? A value. So actually, these are quite interesting developments. Now, I want to caution. It does not mean that give us license to jump onto the bandwagon and say we are so different and that we, Asian spirituality and all this kind of irrationality are the way forward. Okay. Now, it may be so, but the challenge here for me is we must find ways to articulate. But first, let me go back a bit to say what are the problems which I find are with inter-Asia, some of the inter-Asia framework is that first, I think I said that a tendency to become the dominant. Second, I think also the way they do it, the procedures they have, is to, in Chen Guangxing's work, he isolates the West and says as if the West has no influence, and let's just bracket out the West and let's just look within Asia. But I wonder whether it's really feasible, because in every stage of history we are entwined, and many people, some other scholars have also said this. There's one on the study of liberalism that I forgot the name that I wrote about. Can you imagine? But never mind. People have shown how different ideas formed at the same time. Liberalism was forming in different parts of the world differently, right? And so I think that to bracket out the West, it's not an option. And I think it's very important. Why? Because I want to come back. All this war of terror, cultural war, is because, and it gives rise to a kind of extremism, the East versus West, we versus the other. This is again reinforcing a dichotomy. If progressive or critical scholars cannot overcome this dichotomy of the world, the East or the West, or the cultural versus the other, then there's no end. There is no hope. So we have to come back to be able to engage, to understand that human history is entwined. And then in every phase, how the irrational so-called spirituality emerged vis-a-vis kind of scientific knowledge or Western dominant processes. It's entwined. And I think there are scholars who are doing that in Latin America. At the juncture of intersection, how actually the opposite, what is really incommensurable, come out. Not there is incommensurability, but it does not come out of isolation. It precisely is coming out of an encounter, right? And of an encounter with the regimes of knowledge, the global regimes of knowledge, So I think this is very important, because only by doing that can we then show what is different and how it came about, and how this difference actually is part of the meta-narrative of the universal history. And only by doing that can we change the course of knowledge, right? So if we are saying, so one of the problem with inter-Asian knowledge that it can reinforce a relativism. Oh, we are different, we are Asia. So it goes back to the old kind of, we can orientalize ourselves, so-called, But so I think while they've done well, then the next step that's needed is to engage with the other and show them how what is Asia is part of the West. And that has been done in many works before, like, the West and the East are interconnected, how they, Anne Stoller's work and all that. It's a much older history. But I think we need to talk about that more. And we also need to find ways to articulate how this difference is different so that it's translatable. So the idea now is that, or for me, my commitment, or what I believe in, is that there is incommensurability, but we must then be able to articulate and define this incommensurability as translatable, as inseparable with the dominant discourse. And only by that can we change dominant or universal discourse. So I think this is the next step that is vital. And for me, we need to learn how others do it. No, I think people have not done it successfully as well. I mean, there have been path breaking, they have been useful, but I think there's need more to be done here. And I think we can learn from, for me as an anthropologist, we can learn from so-called, I've learned from people like ontological anthropologists. They tend to, in many cases of looking at Latin American logics and desires, they tend to go back to use sciences, whether it's, and largely use medical sciences, how the body works, the blood, and all that, to talk about different logics that are not chronological. The past and the present and the future are entwined. They're not, and that when there's this shift, you know, so they, for instance, concept of homeoresis, HOMEORRHEISS, is a medical term for, you know, ecology of dynamic systems within, I think, within the blood system, and that it retain this dynamic, everything that is different and dynamic, they come back to a trajectory, the same trajectory, but as they return to this same trajectory, it's still dynamic. You understand? So you can return to a past, but the past is not the same as is not between, you cannot divide it. So it's a conjunction of an equilibrium or a balance of conjunction in flux. So when we show that in medical science, the body works like that, then people can understand, you know, if not, they think we are crazy. Or we can also be crazy and say we are so different. You know, I have heard, you know, many young scholars or scholars who also talk about this. This is a bit of the nativism, right? So how do we look at this? And I think that in medical sciences, and I think if you look at natural sciences, can I just say a little bit on this? If you look at in the end of the beginning of 20th century, with the discovery of quantum physics, right? There are already many changes in the natural sciences, which we don't read about, but maybe we can read a little bit and then see. For instance, I want to mention three principles, right? The Heisenberg uncertainty principle, right? This is when they understand the movements at the level of atoms, right? When they find that the velocity of movements affect positions of particles, right? And then you have the Maxwell equation, where they understand, because understanding the atom, they understand that it's impossible to determine what is the cause and the effect. And we social scientists, some of us try to find cause and effect, as if there's a chicken and egg can be answered, right? And then in quantum physics also, with the discovery of density of probabilities, right, which are symmetrical, there is an acknowledgement that there may be parallel forms of knowledge. So these are also the post-Newton science has already discovered. They are also, so maybe we cannot understand them, but we can. So I think what the ontological anthropologists are doing, they are trying to use what is rational and scientific to articulate what is seen as irrational and crazy. Make it seem, hey, it's not so crazy. It may be another form of logic. It may be another form of desire, which in the modern world we seem to bracket them as crazy or not useful, not scientific, you know. Maybe we are at this juncture. So my job is to find how to articulate interaction and how different forms, really very different implementable knowledge form, and how, but they are inseparated and they roll in conjunction to each other. And what is the universal narrative, dominant narrative that has silenced out the mixture, the connections, the silent, you know, the logic and all that. So that's the hard work.
Yeah, I think your last point is very interesting because it kind of related to my own problem in talking about this kind of area and kind of stuff. And one of the problem I have that I'm always thinking that, you know, the next alternative for the area studies, it's same kind of ontological, you know, construction, but my problem is that I always see it that as kind of geographical and typological ontology, but we are talking about different kind of ontology that can be translatable to another kind of form of being, which I think it's somehow becoming an alternative to do area studies. You know, you're not necessarily doing away with the kind of concept of area, but put area in a more kind of a less ontological positions. And we are not talking about Asia as a kind of, you know, having some sort of ontological in itself, but but we have different kinds of ways of looking at different kinds of construction, discursive of knowledge, in which the ontological is being produced and then translated and, you know, exchange and that kind of things. So, saya rasa terima kasih untuk penjelasannya, cukup panjang. Kita diskusi bercakap-cakap tadi. Sekarang waktunya kita buka untuk teman-teman Barangkali ada yang ingin melontarkan komentar, pertanyaan ini kepada baik Ibu Beng Lan maupun kepada saya, silakan. Saya ada di sini ini satu kawan Calvin Koe. Calvin Koe mungkin
dari mana?
Sebentar. Hostnya bisa tolong di
sudah
unmute.
I'm here.
Sudah, oke, silakan Calvin. Dari mana tolong
thank you, Ibu, and also LIPI for hosting this very good discussion. My name is Calvin, and I am a researcher and also policy staff to Ambassador Dino Jalal. And I'm very thank you for your explanation. And me, myself, Ibu, I am, my undergrad is Southeast Asian Studies. So my uni in Indonesia developed the program from Wisconsin University. So my professors, so I have a full-time Southeast Asian Studies back for my undergrad, and I have a one comment and also.
Wisconsin mana nih? Badgers atau mana nih?
Berapa Bapak?
Wisconsin Badgers atau bukan?
Wisconsin University, sir.
Di mana?
Fadjar University.
Yeah, but myself is from Pelita Harapan University, so the professors brought the program to Indonesia. And now, I have one comment and also two questions to you, Ibu. First, now I'm working directly to the ambassadors that really demanded on the policy analysis. And once I work in Southeast Asia, I'm pretty lucky because my background of education is Southeast Asian Studies, in which we can understand the people, the behavior beyond the policy that practice or exercise nowadays. So we can know the culture itself. That's another side that I'm feeling very lucky to have that background. However, sometimes I have experiencing a problem when it comes to connect my knowledge on the Southeast Asian Studies into a policy analysis. So several times I come up with my policy recommendation paper to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs or directly to my boss. He is likely to debate on the policy side. So my question is, I think nowadays, can you explain more the correlations or even the connection, and how do the Southeast Asian studies, and especially to the scholars itself, can be relevant and be supportive to the policymakers? Because now I see, for example, in here, the Kementerian Luar Negeri, a lot of the Director General or even the policy makers are very minimum explanation about the studies or even about the region itself. And the knowledge is very minimum. So how we as the scholars can support the policymakers itself? And that's my first question. Please give some thoughts on that. My second question, Ibu, it's related on Indo-Pacific. We know that now the policy discourse is talking about Indo-Pacific. And it's related maybe about the inter-region study. How could you ever see the possibilities to have so-called Indo-Pacific studies? I know this is still a political definitions on looking at new regions between Pacific and Indian Ocean, trying to become combined to become one. Is it possible to have that particular study? Because that is a very policy relevant as today. So maybe that's my question, and my comment is, I think regional studies is very, very relevant, Ibu. It's not question to be replaced, because compared to international relations as a program in the universities, I think regional studies make more sense to give a person to be more relevant and understand the region itself. And I think now our Kementerian Luar Negeri, our Ministry of Foreign Affairs, has a very minimum knowledge on the region itself, even though the ministry is divided by regions. So I think my comment, also two questions. I hope you can enlighten me about your thoughts about this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kelvin. So, okay, maybe I answer I don't think I have the answer, but anyway, I think, yes, regional studies are important, and despite all the debunking of it, the critique of area studies, which is part and parcel of this missing area, you know, and there's no more Southeast Asia, bounded notions of region are useless because we are in globalized world and all that, but actually now we are seeing COVID-19, and what do we have? Region is coming back in a big way, and big changes in the region, right? Not necessarily for the good, but nevertheless, it shows us that regional knowledge remains important, and I think you're right there. Whether that's Indo-Pacific, I think can be any name. I don't know, it can change. Yeah. You know, there's always, I'm not the one that believes you should stick to anything, even if you don't want Southeast Asian studies, not so wrong either. But because we live in a region, I think there is something about the region that's quite interesting, because we are little grasshoppers between the big giants, you know. Is in Malay saying, we say we're the grasshoppers, in, you know, as the elephants fight, we are the grasshoppers, you know, that may be trampled to death. Or I think as grasshoppers, you may have other ways of escaping. So I think there's something quite important about Southeast Asia. And I think the diversity, you know, in a world going forward, what we need is all forms of knowledge. What's true today is we need to compile knowledge everywhere, see how people, you know, understand different diversity, and because it's diversity that is trying, that we can find solutions, we can find interesting answers and all that. So Southeast Asia is a region rich in diversity. And for that in itself, I think it's worth and important to study both its past, its present, and what it can offer, right? So there may well be an Indo-Pacific. I don't know what the policymakers are saying. You know, if you look at geopolitics, people always, you know, I think, you know, people in policy, of course, you have to focus on much of the bigger geopolitical forces and all that. So there's nothing, it's very possible. You know, there's even Asia-Pacific studies in some places, you know. So why not Indo-Pacific, right? Now, as to the first, how do you advise? I don't know how, because, you know, of course, I think it's hard, but I think the fact that you're conscious about area, that you value the knowledge, you see the importance, and that you're in as a policy advisor, so it's your job to continue to press on. And I think area study scholars are always seen as, you know, even in the human sciences, we are seen as, you know, some people say, oh, this is but just area studies scholars saying, just, you know, it happens, this kind of politics. And in every level, there's politics, you know, of some, whether it's disciplines, certain discourses that are more dominant, that are more trustable, and others seen as just meager and small and all that. It always happens. So I think our job is then to articulate, and if you can show in whatever, if you can show, I think there's nothing wrong with Southeast Asia learning from what's going on in the region. More and more important, sharing knowledge. So I think if your job is there, it's your hard work then to make yourself heard, that we should learn from the West, we should learn from what's going on in the world, but that our politicians should also, and I think they know already. I think it's quite a conscious, they are aware of this, right? And so maybe it's our job to translate and to make ourselves clear. And that is often, of course, very difficult, because sometimes we ourselves make ourselves so unclear too. Maybe that's why human knowledge, you know, is often difficult, because it's always so subjective, so hard to make very clear statements. And that's maybe where our challenge is. So I hope that answers.
Thank you. Bapak, if I may to quite change the question, is it possible?
Okay.
Ibu, just if I may to quite change the question is, do you see any blind spot? Do you see any blind spot from the policymakers in looking Southeast Asia itself? Because right, do you see any blind spot as you as a expert on Southeast Asia? Do you see our policymakers has a very blind spot on looking our region?
It's a hard question because it's very general. So what policy? It depends, right? Is it political policy? Is it environmental policy? I don't know. So I don't know. Maybe in Southeast Asia, there is still maybe now there's a bit more consciousness, I would think, you know, given what's going on in the world. You know, of course, ASEAN is there, but we all know what ASEAN is, right? But at least there's an ASEAN, you know, but maybe there's, what blind spot? Maybe they always don't think the answer can come from the region, you know? Good answers don't come from the region. We always think the region is so backward. We ourselves, we always dismiss ourselves, you know, we look for answers outside. And I think, you know, I'm not championing to say we only look for answers inside, okay? Because that's also very problematic. We should not be parochial. But I think maybe part of it is we need to also look at, maybe there are solutions and there are answers that we have. And I think that there are many. If you look at what people are doing on the ground, you know, even at the COVID-19 crisis, you can see what people are doing on the ground. You know, so many problems but NGOs, individuals, I think in every society, there's so many heartening stories that we hear. And this comes out of local ingenuity, local ability to see, you know, to transcend differences, the human compassion for others and all that. Maybe the blind spot is we don't think we have the answers, that the answers come from somewhere more advanced. Yeah.
Kalau menurut saya sebenarnya bukan blind spot yang menjadi persoalan kalau bicara dalam tataran policy. Dan kebetulan kami di Puslit Kewilayahan sering juga berurusan dengan teman-teman dari Kemenlu ya. Ini ada Ibu Kapus yang bisa cerita banyak gitu tentang bagaimana kita berdialog dengan teman-teman di tataran policy. Satu hal yang menurut saya sangat penting kita lihat bukan soal blind spot, tapi sebenarnya adalah akses. Ya. Jadi ada kecenderungan di tataran policy itu semua selalu dilarikan kepada identitas. Jadi everything dikasih label identitas. Kalau bicara tentang sesuatu politik, ada identitas politik Malaysia, ada identitas politik Filipina. Bahkan kenapa saya sebut akses? Kalau itu bicara tentang konstruksi nasion, boleh saja nggak masalah. Tapi itu menjadi akses ketika itu diterapkan untuk melihat banyak hal lain, termasuk antara lain agama, budaya, dan lain sebagainya. Nah, bapak-bapak yang ada di tataran pengambil kebijakan ini cenderung melihat itu sebagai sebuah kayak semacam extension dari identitas nasional gitu kan. Nah, ini yang menurut saya salah satu yang harus kita sampaikan kritik juga. Jadi persoalan yang dikemukakan oleh Ibu Beng Lan tadi secara sederhana, kalau di tataran polisi bisa disebut di reframe questionnya, apakah bisa kita bicara tentang sesuatu yang sifatnya identitas, entah itu Asia, entah itu Malaysia, entah itu Indonesia dan lain sebagainya gitu kan. Nah, itu yang menurut saya harus hati-hati melihatnya, karena kalau bicara tentang area studies itu banyak macamnya, identitas itu hanya salah satunya gitu kan. Dan saya pikir itu yang buat saya sangat relevan kalau bicara dalam tataran policy, bukan dalam konteks blind spot ya. Karena kalau blind spot kan seolah-olah ada yang tidak dimasukkan, tetapi dia konstruksinya udah jelas gitu. Tapi ini sebenarnya akses sebenarnya. Konstruksinya udah jelas, tapi kemudian diaplikasikan ke dalam hal-hal yang sebenarnya bukan bingkai yang ada dalam bingkai konstruksi itu. Itu mungkin Bung Calvin menurut saya. Oke, jadi kalau ada yang mau bertanya lagi, silakan. Kalau ada yang mau bertanya, saya lihat ini ada beberapa yang cukup menarik di sini. So, kalau ada yang mau menambahkan lagi, bertanya, sebentar ada yang raise hand kayaknya. Ya, sebentar siapa yang raise hand tadi? Susi Sensei, ya. Silakan. Susi Sensei.
Ya, selamat sore. Maaf saya bertanya dalam bahasa Indonesia ya.
Nihongo juga boleh, Sensei.
Jangan. kan kita belajar jadi bahas tentang area studies. Saya sendiri sebetulnya kurang jelas antara bedanya area study dengan foreign study. Saya pribadi, saya orang Indonesia, saya belajar tentang sejarah, saya belajar tentang sejarah Jepang, dan saya sendiri sebenarnya tujuan saya itu sangat jelas dan sangat simpel. Belajar dari proses modernisasi Jepang, dan saya berharap bisa menjadi masukan bagi Indonesia untuk berkembang modernisasi ke selanjutnya. Apakah berhasil, apakah relevan atau tidak, itu nanti saya akan pikirkan dan coba diskusi dengan teman-teman saya. Nah, yang saya penasaran ya dari pembahasan hari ini adalah area studies. Jadi ini area study yang Anda bahas, kemudian dengan mengambil referensi para peneliti dari Amerika, dari Eropa, dan sebagainya ya. Manfaat praktis. Jadi apa ya, usefulness gitu ya. Belajar, jadi kita saling belajar gitu ya dari berbagai pihak gitu ya. Manfaat praktis nyata ya, usefulness gitu ya bagi kita di Asia. Misalnya untuk kami orang Indonesia itu apa? Apakah ada sesuatu tujuan yang jelas dari area studies yang Ibu Beng Lan sampaikan atau rangkum? Itu saja. Apakah cukup jelas?
So I missed the part Ibu Susi kata tadi, apakah bezanya area studies dengan
foreign studies?
Foreign studies. Okay. Apakah itu studies? I tend to think, maaf ya, saya berbahasa Inggris kalau ya. Nama atau identity yang diberikan kepada labeling yang diberikan kepada sesuatu bidang itu, I think it depends, how people, each country they call it. Of course, some people, still call, for instance, in you can have you can have Malay studies, you can have Philippine studies, you can have or cultural study, different kind of groupings and all that, or indigenous studies and all that. So for me, the labeling it's subjective. There are many. I'm not so concerned. I'm not even so concerned if you don't call it area studies, really, at the end of the day, because I think all these identifications of disciplines, so-called, are artificial, But of course, we as scholars, we are based somewhere. We are based in area studies, in political science, or in whatever, right? Or in foreign studies or whatever. But I think area studies largely defined, or what the nature is, really understanding particular regions, particular countries within a region. So you have specific local knowledge and you have wider regional knowledge, right? So that I would see. But I think the important is to understand the country, the region, and its location and its connection to the world, the past and the present. I think that's just understanding. At the end of the day, it is about the job of us as scholars, whatever labels we are in, whatever disciplines we are in, whatever methodologies we are training, we cannot escape that. Because if you're a historian, you're a historian, fine, nothing wrong with that. So work within your what you know best. But I think be open to the idea, be conscious that whatever disciplines you are, take a bit of distance, because it's artificial, So if you're interested in whatever bidang, whether it's foreign studies or diplomatic studies, then you also have to understand what other scholars talk about the subject you're interested in. I think that's more important, And then you can really then make your part, do your part in contributing from your location, from your understanding of a particular community or location. What can you contribute truly to knowledge of the subject that you're studying? I think that's our job as scholars, whatever category, whatever identity and label we're in. It's a matter of accidental sometimes, and it usually is about our affiliation, where we are. If I had been based in an anthropology department, I bet I would be an anthropologist, but I would still be working on what I'm working. But then engaging it and problematizing anthropology with knowledge that I find in Southeast Asia. So I hope that answers Ibu. So I think it doesn't matter.
Selain contribute to the knowledge production,
Pardon?
Manfaat praktis apa yang bisa usefulness? Okay. Jadi contribution to to contribute to the knowledge production. Okay. Ya, selain itu, selain contribute to the knowledge production, manfaat praktis apa lagi? Jadi usefulness. Jadi misalnya they contribute to our society or contribute to the information. This is kalau terlalu heboh mungkin. Manfaat apa yang kira-kira bisa kita harapkan dari area studies?
I think its knowledge production is about human future too, about the world. Can we contribute to, what we've been talking about is about us as scholars doing our part in moving the frontiers of knowledge, which is relevant to the world, whether it's about humankind, whether it's, new kind of politics, what is the new future, what kind of new society, I don't know, it's very, it depends on your area of research, right? But whatever you're doing, I believe that you should make that local knowledge not only local and not only relevant. You should not just be happy with that this is, I can understand Malaysia or Indonesia, but I think we ought to make that link to how that knowledge and what that manifestation of phenomenon is in Malaysia or Indonesia is tied to larger, similar events, and what can we understand from this example? How is it linked to what is possible, the good and bad? And I think that is about, I don't know, that's how I see our work as scholars. We cannot, of course, we can only contribute in whatever area that you do, your subject of study, but you should be ambitious to make known what you're studying in the particular case, that it is not just isolated or tersendiri, but that is linked and that it can contribute to similar questions that people ask that's linked to yours. So our job will be to link the things you're interested in. How is it linked to other things? How is it linked to other debates or other phenomena? I think there are links.
Ya, rasa
practical usefulness. Apakah harus ada manfaat yang praktis, yang nyata, selain knowledge production?
Yeah, it is the same old question, right? Knowledge, right? Is knowledge useful or not useful? So maybe the policymakers also will say, you are humanities scholars and social scientists. They don't take our solution because we always talk very fluff. They don't know what's the answer. So is that useless? I don't know. So of course, our job is to be able to make it translatable and practical, and maybe it does. But I think if you can educate the younger generation to free their mind, actually our mind is so trapped and so. That's what Chun Kuan-Ching talks about. The Asian mind needs to be liberal. It remains colonized. It remains trapped, and maybe. That's our job. We cannot be, unless you go and work as a policymaker. Even policymakers find it hard to influence the bosses. But I think, there are limitations, but it does not mean that what we work on or what we say is useless. But I think you can find forums to make interventions. Sometimes we are lucky that we can get heard. Sometimes we are not. You can continue to write and people will read it. So I think that's the limit, but if you believe that your work is relevant and is useful to the world, is useful to enlighten other people, younger scholars or younger people in general, that I think those are important too. That's the limitations of our occupation, I think. Yeah.
Ya, tapi di satu sisi juga itu satu hal yang dikritik oleh Inter-Asia sebenarnya untuk meliberate kita dari pemikiran yang sifatnya seperti ini gitu, bahwa semua itu harus berorientasi kepada use. Jadi pragmatism, terus kemudian sesuatu yang harus ada produknya, yang kalau tidak ada produknya itu sesuatu yang dianggap tidak berguna, kalau tidak ada use-nya. Padahal use sendiri kan sifatnya sangat sangat kontekstual gitu. Buat kelompok berbagai kelompok use-nya beda. Use untuk negara belum tentu bermanfaat untuk masyarakat adat misalnya.
Yeah, and I think this is where if you can help people think critically, it's very, very important.
Yeah,
We live in Southeast Asia, all of us live in countries that are full of racism, right? We see the other, other race, other religion as so foreign. And we grow up in a discourse that's highly hierarchical and racist. I think in Southeast Asia, it's very true, whether we like it or not. And sometimes we also fall into it because our family, our tradition, But I think if we can, it's just slowly, And if we are able to show that life is more complex, categories are more complex, that what's constructed by politics and ideology, it is very important, very powerful weapons, that if people are actually more enlightened, more critical, they won't fall into all kinds of senseless acts. They won't repeat the kind of problems we see in the world and our societies around us. And in this, I think more than ever, knowledge, enlightenment is so important because, more and more every day. I don't know, I see that, it's very important because the ability to, to know and to question, it's,
Oke. Terima kasih Sensei, Susi Sensei. Ini ada Mbak Yulan yang mau tanya.
Ibu Yulan, ya.
Ya, silakan Mbak Yulan.
Yulan.
Yulan, how are you?
Hello, I don't see you.
You want to see my face later?
Yes, I want to see your face.
Okay, I open.
Yes. Hello.
Okay, I just want to ask you about the methodology. You know, when I learn about identity, it's rather difficult because you've been being trained. Your identity is fixed, right? Trying to understand your position different. So now you suggest we have to talk about irrationality and also fragility. How can we do that? Because we're being trained in different way. In the opposite way, we have to think rationally. Nothing irrational, right? And then everything that's why we're talking about practical, fixed thing is better for us rather than trying to understand about fragility, irregularity, So what you suggest people to try to learn to, to undo their own present position, so they can grab these kind of things, It's not an easy process, but I think you can help us in that sense. Thank you.
There's no magic answer, Yulan. I think we all struggle with it. I mean, it's not like we talk about what's irrational that's important, but I think what we are trying to articulate is that if there are other ways of thinking, but which has been dismissed as useless or that people don't trust it, and sometimes maybe it's true that they are valid as so, but if you think that there's another kind of other ways, other local, I'll go back to kind of very conservative categories that neo-nativism maybe, but maybe our hard job is to translate them and make them understandable, that they are not irrational, nor senseless, but that may be useful. So how do you do that? Now that's a hard job lah. But I think one thing is you need to be interested in a particular question, passionate about certain things that you find yourself preoccupied with, and then try to read a lot, read widely, and then see what are the questions out there. And then I think oftentimes when we read beyond our disciplines, beyond our region, you start to see that there are a particular class in itself we think is universal. Class is not universal. There is class, but class takes so much, the content of class, the shape of class takes different forms in different societies, right? So it's important, I think, that for us to, so it's a very general question, very hard for me to answer, but I think that's part of it, is to take whatever question you're interested in, whatever research question you're looking at. Don't take it for granted. Don't just repeat what everybody says the category has been used. Look at what you're studying, see what bugs you. Usually it's a question that bugs you from your own personal experience, and then try to read widely, try to compare, use things that are very near, and then maybe from there you start thinking, you know, and then you start thinking, and then that's, yeah. And I think a lot of people are, partly is the call to reason, the call to some kind of methods, or they're out there, or procedures, we should always question it. It's not that it's wrong, but I think the call to reason, or call to particular methods or particular categories, is a ground for us to read, to take distance, and to see whether this call or this compulsion for us to follow certain steps is a way in which it make us disqualify some data that we are looking at, right? And maybe if you question that, then you start to think, what about other forms of expression that are generally not admissible as evidence, you know? Can they be seen otherwise? Can we articulate and delineate what they are, so that we can play this logic or these manifestations against the kind of existing dominant categories that we are often forced to fit, like class, we just fit, right? And then from there, we complicate, or we all change the terms of understanding of that category. I think that's all you can do, little by little. But if you do this and then it becomes bigger, then then when someone doing race and ethnicity after Ibu Yulang, you know, which young people are reading your work on Indonesian Chinese, and then if you start saying something that is a bit, that is, I think, different, but it gives us another window of understanding local Indonesian reality, you may perpetuate, people may take it up and explore, and so these are little path breakers. So it's about original knowledge that you can as a scholar. And I think that's don't take everything and just don't question and apply. I think our job, is to find that gap and to articulate it within understandable concepts, understandable practices. If not, people will think you're crazy again. You don't want to be an indigenous nativist scholar. Although I believe that, you know, some of the things they're trying to say are important, but we don't want to fall into this category of, you know, we are Asia, we are so different, you cannot understand us. So I think its purpose is counterproductive, you know. And I'm very afraid, because I see many, you know, this like post-colonialism is a very useful, very progressive system of thought, and I think still important. But sometimes it becomes used so extreme, you know, that everything Western is bad, you know, it's also wrong. So, you know, so it's a balance. So I think maybe I have tried to answer. As you see, it's very blur and very difficult to put it down into very pragmatic categories. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Mbak Yulan. Cukup jelas kan? Jadi,
nice to meet you, Ilan.
So we have two questions. One from the first one from Bu Yakti, and the second one from Yijia. And yes. I'll start with Bu Yakti first. Silakan.
Okay. To make it so Beng Lan can see me.
Yes.
You see me?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. So my question is, you mentioned about you know, the declining of the area studies, especially Southeast Asian study in the West, like in the US and also in Europe. But some people say, like King, for instance, Victor King, that actually is developing in Southeast Asia. So
what is different?
Southeast Asia. So actually the area studies is developing in the region in Southeast Asia. Fadjar always smile when I mention about Victor King.
Yeah.
So
I said that too. I said
what
that
do you
too.
think about that? And also, what is your prediction about the area studies, especially Southeast Asian studies in Southeast Asia?
Okay. Well, I think the fact that as area studies is declining in the US, in the West, it is flourishing in Southeast Asia is a fact that is not a Victor King. I said that in my book too, and I think many scholars and all of us know for as it's declining, it's flourishing because many of us are coming back, the younger generation coming back, and and universities are also expanding on area studies, Southeast Asian studies, and all that, right? It's part and parcel of wider happenings, right? So it's a fact, but also I think it's not a same fact everywhere, because I think in every country you have different problems. I don't know about Indonesia whether it's flourishing, but you have I think everywhere there are different problems, different sets of problems. Sometimes so whether it's really flourishing is a question, because in some countries I think area studies or Southeast Asian studies are experiencing a decline. Students don't want to do it. I think in Singapore, for instance, we had problems of finding students. Students prefer to do dominant or whether go to main disciplines, or they go more sexy disciplines like communications, new media, and all that. So that's a perpetual problem everywhere, right? So it depends. So the problem of area studies, can be many problems, right? And this is where, that's why I think there's a need for people working area studies to be conscious of what's going on, to read, and then to make out of your own model, what you have, the expertise you have, what can you contribute? Is there a particular kind of Indonesian studies that is talking about Indonesia, yet Indonesia's location, connection to the wider world? What can the Indonesian kind of Southeast Asian studies contribute to Southeast Asian studies per se? How can it contribute, add to debates, enrich debates, or change debates, so that's our job, I think, rather than again following, whether it's a national compulsion to be, very myopic or whatever. I mean, we should defy those kind of very conservative and narrow, rigid kind of orientations, or even area studies becoming something very conservative and say, oh, we are different. Let's go and look at local wisdom, local knowledge, local logic, and then and forget about everything else. It's also problematic. And I've listened to papers that say, oh, this is the Indonesian logic. This is very different. This is peculiar, and this is, it is. But what does it do? How can it change our dominant understanding? Don't make hybrid knowledge and just more and more differences. You need to use that difference and engage and show how that changes dominant knowledge, how that arises with, connection with other dominant forms of knowledge that is similar, and how that in itself, if you use your story, how that challenges the dominant narrative. And that will change knowledge. If all of us do that, I think social science will become much more complex and much more, there will be many more discourses, many more debates, not just by very strong debates that we all follow, very happily, or sometimes we are compelled to follow. And I think here, every region has its own discourse. In Japan, I know they have their own discourse, right? But there are not enough scholars to translate those discourses out to the general world. So our job is to learn from what's going on in the world, other wider debates, and our job is also to discover from understanding what's going on in the world today, the debates around it. What about our experience? What kind of debates, what kind of questions emerge, what kind of, and then to use that as also to start a narrative that can engage with our world and with the outer world. That is what scholarship should be. And then it will, so the job of in really pluralizing knowledge, it's up to us, and we all keep saying of a dominant West, and it's there. But I think if we all do our part, then the knowledge production will become very different in the future. And maybe the time is right for this too. but also we have to be careful that it's not going to become a conservative, fanatic, a kind of an Asianism, Asia is better than everywhere. That's also very dangerous. So it's always have to be balanced. Always remember what our role is. I think that's all we can do. So area studies, there's a promise, but I think how you chart your direction is equally important.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Yati. So there is a question from Yijia. Yijia is a doctoral student from Taiwan, and so she was asking about the COVID. COVID has been becoming a global issue, and
what COVID? Yeah.
COVID. Yeah. Why do we draw the border of Asia? And basically, she was asking of how we draw the border of Asia. And then she thinks that somehow Southeast Asia could be a region because of colonial, post-colonial history and phenomenon. And what are the common things beside the geographically closer than other places? Is it a transportation development, or maybe something else? Maybe related to global or earth studies or something else. So basically, she was asking how do we draw the boundary or the border of Asia?
Okay, it's again a very general question and difficult to answer because one can answer differently. So there are certain borders that we inherit from dominant processes, like how is Southeast Asia defined? We already know south of where? South of China, east of India, but then so it's a very big region, can include Sri Lanka, can even include Madagascar, they want to count cultural influence and all that. So why at the end of the day is it defined? It's always political. There's a history to the certain construction of knowledge, and one can always define it by mapping new kind of, are there larger structural linkages that one can say of a larger region, and so on and so forth. One can use many, and even I think the study of DNA and all that, right? Different ways of mapping regions. So it depends given the history. So how do we map Asia is again very controversial depending on, so when we talk about Asia, and many of us in Southeast Asian studies, we tend to think of East Asia, South Asia at most, we even don't think of Central Asia. We don't think of Middle East because Middle East is another region already because that's an Oriental way of thinking, So, but actually what is Asia? Do we include, what is Asia? It's a very big question. So so I think regions in many ways. So I always think that it's always it's like thinking that it's 2-in-1 as one example. We cannot have one fixed mind to say, oh, only region, that's it. This is carved. But we ought to see that in certain ways there are certain regions that have become universal. It's in people's imaginaries. So either we think we can at times use it as problematize it, or sometimes but so there are workable. There have been there certain models. So it's up to you depending on what purpose do you want to define. But I think there are Asia can Asia, the general dominant ideas is East Asia, Southeast Asia, South Asia, but then Middle East, Central Asia, right? Middle East is called what? We can say Western Asia, so many depending. So it depends, But I think at one hand, while region is important as we see, and because as we see, what we are seeing today is globalization as a crisis, and COVID-19 expresses this crisis, makes it manifest, and what comes back is the global, so global, but still there are chains, of production that's connected, that's linked, and so dependent on China in the current world, right? So the chains of production is now a question. So now people need to diversify in case something happens in China, they can have food or they can have their factories going on. So that has brought into light the problem. So I think it depends, but region remains important, and the post-COVID-19 world, I think, as we already see, is playing out, the discourses between the US and China, you know, it's what's this? It is a new, the new politics in power, the new geopolitics, geo-economic politics in power. The old politics still there, but you know, emergingly, there are also new cleavages. What's happening in the US has also changed old alignments, and so many things are changing today, you know, and then we cannot travel, at least for quite a while, you know. If the virus is around, it would change our behavior. So all this would change our understanding of region. So I would take it at, you know, I don't adopt a position where people, region is useless, debunked, there's nothing important because the world is fluid. Yes, at one hand it's true, but it's also not true fully, because sometimes the world can become very regional and very parochial, right? And so now we are also at this time, the discourse of Asia becomes very important, headed by China, right? China is the leading figure. What kind of world would that be? Question mark. You're from Taiwan, you have another answer, right? So depending where you are, you know, but we are seeing definitely region remains important, remains problematic, but it's definitely, I think, what we have to contend with in the world today. Yeah.
Okay.
I see her, she's not there. If she wants to respond, you may have the answer yourself, or some kind of answer yourself.
Yeah, I think it's quite. Do you have any follow-up question maybe from Taiwan? No? Okay. So anyone ada yang mau bertanya lagi? Ada yang mau berkomentar? Barangkali kalau dianggap memang sudah cukup, sudah jam 4 barangkali, karena sebentar lagi sudah mau buka puasa. Jadi ada beberapa hal yang akan saya mungkin tidak summarize, tapi memberikan highlight ada beberapa hal yang cukup penting, singkat saja. Jadi dari diskusi tadi kita bisa menyimpulkan bahwa memang benar area studies itu mengalami krisis, terutama area studies yang dipraktekkan yang dipraktekkan pertama kali di Amerika dan Eropa. Tetapi itu bukan berarti the end of the story, karena banyak beberapa alternatif yang mungkin bisa kita pikirkan. Salah satunya adalah bicara tentang cara untuk melihat area dalam kerangka berpikir yang dikemukakan misalnya oleh Inter-Asia Studies. Nah, itu salah satu hal yang mungkin bisa kita pikirkan, bahwa persoalan yang ada itu tidak hanya persoalan yang sifatnya monodirectional, datang dari Amerika, Eropa ke Indonesia, ke Asia atau Southeast Asia, tetapi persoalan itu juga bisa ada di kalangan negara-negara atau komunitas yang ada di Asia. Itu yang disebut oleh area studies inter-Asia sebagai interreferencing. Jadi itu yang kita harus terbuka terhadap kemungkinan-kemungkinan hal itu. Dan kemudian yang kedua, bahwa persoalan area studies itu sebaiknya tidak hanya dipahami dalam kerangka geografi, atau artinya Asia, Southeast Asia sebagai sebuah kawasan, sebagai sebuah region. Pada satu titik itu memang penting, tetapi pada sisi lain itu menjadi sebuah persoalan. Dan kembali kepada konsepsi sempit tentang kawasan, seperti misalnya identitas sebuah suku, identitas sebuah wilayah itu sendiri merupakan sebuah problem. Sehingga yang perlu kita lihat dalam area studies ke depan itu adalah pertanyaan bagaimana sebenarnya posisi kita dan perspektif kita untuk melihat kawasan itu sendiri. Jadi bukan dalam artian sebuah ontologi yang sifatnya jadi selesai, tetapi sebuah ontologi yang bisa kita lihat dalam berbagai dimensi, baik itu kultural maupun politik maupun spiritual dan lain, bahkan termasuk diantaranya scientific. Dengan kasus COVID ini salah satu hal yang memang menarik untuk dipersoalkan atau dipertanyakan kembali. Nah, seperti Trump pernah bilang, apakah memang benar ini virus Asia gitu kan? Jadi ini satu persoalan yang harus dicarikan justifikasi maupun kritiknya dalam ranah ilmu kesehatan barangkali atau ilmu virologi. Nah, ini satu poin, dan kemudian yang terakhir ada persoalan juga sebenarnya dalam Inter-Asia Studies, yaitu kecenderungan Inter-Asia untuk menjadi sangat dominan. Jadi menjelaskan sesuatu itu adalah berdasarkan seolah-olah hanya Asia, dan Barat itu diletakkan di ranah yang tidak relevan, di luar itu. Ini sendiri kita juga harus hati-hati karena sejarah mengatakan interaksi, globalisasi dan lain sebagainya sudah berjalan sejak dulu gitu. Dan ini tidak bisa dihindari. Saya rasa sehingga diskursus dan narasi yang sekarang itu bukan lagi bersifat sosialisme atau versus kapitalisme Barat lawan Timur, tetapi lebih kepada persoalan bagaimana pengalaman, experience itu menentukan bentuk kritik dan menentukan bentuk posisi politik kita terhadap diskursus atau produksi pengetahuan yang muncul, entah itu dari Eropa, Amerika, maupun dari sambat saya. Mungkin yang mau ditambah Ibu Beng Lan? Atau
I think
cukup?
it's a good conclusion. So,
Ya.
yeah.
Jadi terima kasih sekali, dan untuk teman-teman sekali lagi terima kasih sudah ikut bergabung sampai selesai. Dan sekedar untuk pengumuman, minggu depan kita akan punya volume kedua, Area Escape. Nanti kita akan bercakap atau berbincang dengan James Ostery dari Emory University, dan topiknya minggu depan adalah tentang Islamscape. Jadi bagaimana dimensi transnasional dalam penelitian Islam di kawasan Asia Tenggara dan kebijakan luar negeri yang terkait. Jadi jamnya sedikit agak maju, jam 1 sampai jam 3, harinya sama dengan hari Rabu. Nanti silakan silakan ditengok di Instagramnya Pusat Penelitian Kewilayahan atau di Facebooknya Pusat Penelitian Kewilayahan, atau di IG saya atau Facebook saya untuk informasi lebih lanjut tentang hal itu. Jadi sekali lagi terima kasih Ibu
Fadjar to organize this and to everyone for attending.
Ya, terima kasih dan stay safe di sana, sehat-sehat selalu, dan mudah-mudahan kita bisa ketemu lagi di satu waktu yang lain nanti. Terima kasih semuanya juga.
Terima kasih. Bye.
Bye.